الهدى يا شهر الندى.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه الطيبين الطاهرين. We start with the name of Allah. We praise and thank Allah for all of the givings He gave without Allah being obligated to give anything. And we ask Allah to raise the rank of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and to protect his nation from what he feared for it. Thereafter, previously, we were mentioning the invalidators of wudu. Now, Shaykh Abdullah, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him, in his book, The Summary, Al-Mukhtasar, goes to speak about al-istinja, which is cleaning oneself after urination or defecation. The author, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him, said, Section 9, cleaning oneself after defecation and urination, istinja. He said, it is an obligation to make istinja with water whenever any moist substance is emitted from any of the eliminatory outlets, except mani, until that area becomes pure, or by wiping that area 3 or more times with material that is uprooting, solid, pure, unrespectable, and adequate for the removal of the najis filth, such as a stone or paper, until the area becomes clean, even if a trace remains. So here we're talking about cleaning oneself after some staining or contaminating matter comes out of the private parts. He said it is an obligation to make istinja with water whenever any moist substance is emitted from any of the eliminatory outlets. So if, hypothetically speaking, something completely dry exited from the eliminatory outlets, istinja would not be necessary because the najis, the filthy thing, contaminates other things through its moisture. If something was completely dry, however, and there was a completely dry najis filth, and it contacted something that was pure that was also completely dry, then in this case, the najis filth would not contaminate that other pure thing, Rather, the contamination wouldn't be spread. He said, whenever any substance, moist substance, is emitted from any of the eliminatory outlets, that is the front private part of the male or female, and the anus of either. He said, except mani, because mani, according to the school of Al-Shafi'i, is considered pure. He said, until the area becomes pure, that is, one would use water, rinsing the private part until the volume, the bulk of the filth was removed, along with its traces, its attributes. He said, or by wiping that area 3 or more times. Yes, wiping 3 times is necessary, even if a person deemed that after 1 wipe or 2 wipes they had removed all of the filth, but the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam ordered us to wipe 3 times, so a person would be obligated to add to the 1 or 2 wipes until at least they completed 3. Now, of course, when one wipes, they should wipe with something that is pure, something that is clean. So if they use something to wipe themselves with on the first wipe, then upon the second wipe, they would use something that's pure. They wouldn't use the same thing that they just used to wipe themselves, using the same spot of whatever they wiped themselves with to re-wipe themselves. Rather, if they wiped themselves the first time, then whatever they used, the part of themselves that they wiped with, the part of the thing that they wiped themselves with became filthy. So then they would use a different part of it. So if they were using a stone, if they wiped themselves once, then they would use a different stone the second time, or a different edge of the same stone. Or if they were using paper towel, for example, then on the second wipe, they would use a different piece of paper towel, or a different part or edge or side of the same paper towel that was not contaminated with filth. He said, by wiping that area 3 or more times with material that is uprooting, pure, solid, unrespectable, and adequate for the removal of najis filth. So these are some of the conditions for what one will use to wipe themselves with. That is, if a person wanted to make istinja by wiping, that's permissible even if water was available. However, when they make the istinja, they must use something that is dry. So a person wouldn't use, for example, wet paper towel or wet napkin or a baby wipe that was moist with whatever solutions that they soak them in. So it should be dry, solid also, meaning not like something that crumbles like a clump of dirt. It should be uprooting, meaning that it has the quality of lifting and removing the filth. Thus, it would not be completely smooth like glass. Because had it been like that, just smooth, then it wouldn't lift and remove the filth. Rather, it would spread it around. So it would be dry, solid, pure also, that one would use something that is not filth in and of itself. So if a person, for example, found a piece of petrified feces that had dried up and become very hard, almost like a rock, but it's not a rock, it's feces, so he couldn't use that for istinja by wiping. Then, so he would use something dry, solid, pure, uprooting, and of course, not religiously respectable. That is, when one wants to make istinja, they wouldn't use something that is considered religiously respectable to wipe themselves with. An example of that is something with Quran written upon it, or religious knowledge written upon it, or something with a respected name written upon it, like the name of Allah or the name of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So one would be mindful not to use something like that. Another thing that is considered religiously respectable is human food. So a person wouldn't use human food to make al-istinja. He said, such as a paper or such as a stone or paper. So both of these are valid and sufficient to be used for al-istinja. He said, until the area becomes clean, even if a trace remains. That is, the person, when he wipes, he would wipe until he removed all of the bulk that can be removed by wiping. He would remove the bulk of it and all of the qualities, everything that could be removed by wiping. However, if there was a trace left behind that could only be removed by water, not by wiping, then that trace would be overlooked. He said, this is valid even if water was present, provided that moist najis filth does not move or become dry. Thus, if a person waited or was delayed in a way, in any case, if a person allowed the najis filth to dry up before they wiped it away, then they would be obligated to use water instead. That is, wiping would no longer be sufficient. He said, if it moved, this also makes water necessary for one to make istinja with. That is, if a person relieved themselves and then the filth after relieving themselves settled in the spot that it was, then after settling, it moved again, relocating to another spot, then the person would have to use water and wiping would no longer be sufficient. The person wipes, as we said, a minimum of 3 times. If 3 times is not enough to remove that filth, then he needs to add wipes until he can get it all off. That is, everything that can be removed by wiping, and the traces that could only be removed by water would be overlooked. He said, if the emitted substance moved from where it initially settled or dries, then water must be used. And this is the case. And Allah the Exalted knows best. Then the Shaykh, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him, went into a section talking about the obligatory ghusl. And this is the act of worship that we do to remove the major ritual impurity. The author, may Allah the Exalted have mercy on him, said, among the conditions of the prayer is purification from major ritual impurity, which is called Al-Hadathul Akbar, by performing the obligatory whole body bath. That is, one must rinse their whole body down. Or dry purification when one is unable to perform the obligatory ghusl. He said there are 5 occurrences that render the whole body bath, that is the ghusl, an obligation. So these matters that will be mentioned are the matters that make it obligatory upon one to make a ghusl for the prayer. He said the emission of mani, which is the ejaculated fluid, and we've mentioned it before. The ejaculation has certain signs to it, because there's more than one type of discharge that may come out of one's frontal private part. So the qualities, the attributes of the mani is that it has 3 qualities. If any one of them is present, then one would judge it as mani. Among them is that it squirts. When it X's out, it squirts some, and then some, and then some. It squirts out. Second of all, it is accompanied by the feeling of pleasure. And after that feeling, then one's desire wanes. And third, that it has the smell of dough when it is moist, and it has the smell of egg whites when it is dry. So if any of these matters existed in it, then it would be considered the mani, because there are other emissions that would come out of a person under different circumstances, like the fluid that comes out before the mani, or when a person is sexually excited, for example. Likewise, the fluid that comes out sometimes when a person exerts themselves a lot in physical activity, like lifting something heavier or the like, then sometimes a fluid will come out. These fluids don't have the same judgment as the mani, so a person from them would merely make istinja and make wudu, for example, and pray. He said the emission of mani, sexual intercourse, and the minimum of sexual intercourse is for the man to put the entire head of the penis into the private part. So if this occurred, then sexual intercourse would have been performed even if there was no ejaculation from either party. He said menses. Menses is one of the matters that make the full body bath, the ghusl, obligatory, but it applies only to women. And the menstrual blood is the blood that exits from the woman's private part, that is not due to childbirth, nor is it because of sickness. Then he said postpartum bleeding. Postpartum bleeding is the blood that exits after childbirth, and it could last for 1 moment or as long as 60 days. He said, and childbirth itself, that is, had hypothetically a woman given birth and there was no blood that came out, then still she would be required to make a ghusl afterwards for the validity of the prayer because of the childbirth itself. The author, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him, said, well, first, so any of these 5 matters that occurs to a person, 2 of them affecting males and females, those being the emission of mani and sexual intercourse, and the other 3, which are the menstrual bleeding, the postpartum bleeding, and the childbirth, only affecting women. Any of these matters that occur to a person, they will be required to make the obligatory ghusl before praying. He said the integrals of the obligatory ghusl are 2. the intention to remove the major ritual impurity, which we call the Hadath al-Akbar, or the like. Yani he would have this intention or another intention that is valid in this case, like to do what makes the prayer permissible, or to perform the obligatory ghusl, for example. We learned that when making ghusl, the person should make the intention of the obligatory ghusl, not just ghusl, because ghusl by itself could just mean cleaning, and so just the intention of ghusl would not be sufficient. Rather, one would make the intention for the obligatory ghusl, for example. He said, and to wash the whole body with water, including the hair and skin, even if the hair was thick. So the second integral is that one must rinse the whole body from head to toe, all the hair and skin, even if the hair was thick. So it's not like the situation with the wudu, when a man has a thick beard, that he's not required to make sure that the water reaches all of the skin underneath it. Rather, for the ghusl, the water must reach all of the hair and the skin underneath the hair, around his body, his or her body. The water has to flow. The person needs to have the intention established when the water first touches the body. It doesn't matter which part of the body the water touched first, because unlike wudu, there's not an obligatory order, an obligatory sequence when making the obligatory ghusl. Rather, if the water hit the foot first and the person had the intention, then that will be sufficient for establishing the intention, and then they would just make sure that they wash the entire body from head to toe after that. Likewise, if the water hit the head, for example, the face first, while the person's intention was established, then that will be sufficient for establishing the intention, and then they would continue and rinse down the whole body. Then the author, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him, said, the conditions of purification are Islam, that is, that these matters of wudu and ghusl, they would be valid from a Muslim, not a kafir, for example. But we mentioned that kufr does not invalidate one's wudu. So if a person was a Muslim and then he committed kufr and then came back to Islam without having performed any of the four invalidators that we mentioned, then he would still be on wudu. However, if a person, for example, was a kafir and he called himself making wudu, then he embraced Islam after that, he would still need to make wudu, again, for the validity of his prayer. He said at-tamyiz, which is mental discrimination. He called it here the capacity to reason and discern, and we explained previously what we mean by that one would be able to comprehend when addressed and have the ability to answer questions based on their comprehension, and that some scholars call mental discrimination the state that one reaches when they are become independent with eating, drinking, and performing istinja, performing cleaning oneself after urination and defecation. He said, the absence of anything which prevents the water from reaching the part that must be washed. So when a person wants to make wudu or ghusl, then the body part that he wants to wash should not be coated with something in a way that the water would not reach the skin or the nail or the hair, etc. So an example of that is a man, for example, having their hand, for example, coated with latex, and then they pour water over the hand. The water wouldn't reach the hand because the latex would block the water from reaching the skin and nails. Or likewise, the manicure, the nail polish. Nail polish, it coats in a way that blocks the water from reaching the nails. So if a woman was wearing nail polish and she wanted to make wudu and she performed the wudu while the nail polish was still applied, then the wudu would not be valid because the water would not reach the nails, and the nails are part of the hand that is required to be washed. That is, the water needs to flow over it. So one needs to remove the likes of this polish, for example, to when one wants to make the obligatory wudu for the validity of the wudu. If they did not and they called themselves performing the wudu and they did that, and then they went to perform their prayer, then their wudu would not be valid, and their prayer thus would not be valid. We'll stop there, God willing, and continue in the next section, continuing more conditions for purification. Walhamdulillah wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
يا شهر الخيرات والإحسان والبركات يا رمضان